and sync.
Get this adjusted real quick.
Dick. Batman needs more dick. Dick Grayson. You see what I did there? It's a clever joke.
Titans, go!
Dick Grayson's last live-action appearance was the Titans TV show. You know, the one where he says something about Batman. Before that, it was Batman and Robin. While Nightwing has appeared in several animated projects over the years, some better than others, films have been hesitant to bring him into the fold, mostly due to criticisms of the Robin character as a concept. You know, I remember back ages ago, I was watching Doug Walker. Yeah, I know. Bear with me on this one. He had a list of the biggest dumbasses in distress. You know, characters who essentially were a drag on the story, who were there only to be rescued by the main hero. Robin ranked on Walker's list as number 8. That was not just Doug Walker saying that. That was popular consensus. Robin was someone Batman had to rescue, a target that drew attention. At least, that was the perspective of those who didn't read Batman comics, or Teen Titans comics for that matter. A few more well-read Batman fans might have perceived Robin as a character inserted to soften Batman's image during the darker period of Batman's history. And this isn't technically untrue, but it's an oversimplification for sure. But for most at the time, that being the 90s and 2000s, Robin was seen the same way conservatives did during the 50s. He made Batman gayer. A lot of Dick Grayson hate is anchored in homophobia, thanks in part to Frederick Wortham's book, Seduction of the Innocent. There's no video on comic history without mentioning Wortham to some degree. The book argued that comics were corrupting the youth, turning children into delinquents, or worse, homosexuals. Wortham argued that depictions of Batman and Robin were depictions of domestic homosexual life. Even though Dick Grayson is like Batman's son, he's his ward, he's not a lover of the same age. Before we get too caught up in comic book lore, however, I want to thank Mint Mobile for sponsoring today's video. Mint Mobile's greatest strength is ultimately its convenience. They know how complicated shopping for new plans can be, so they put it all online. No stores, no salespeople. Got an unlocked phone lying around? Great! Or maybe you want the newest model because your dog ate your old one, or you just can't stand the sight of your phone anymore. I know what that's like. That's cool too. Mint Mobile sells phones, so you can just buy a new one there, I guess. No matter what route you take, you get to keep your phone number and all your existing contacts. So you can avoid explaining to your elderly relatives and friends how your number changed. Or maybe don't and hope they don't text you anymore. They're offering premium wireless service without the premium costs. All plans include unlimited talk and text to the nation's largest 5G network. Plus, free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the UK. Mint provides fast and reliable 5G coverage to 98% of Americans, and 4G LTE coverage to 99%. But ultimately, your data plan is your choice. 5 gigabytes, 15, 20, unlimited. Choose the plan that's right for you, so you're not paying extra for service you don't use. And all of Mint Mobile's plans come with a 7-day unconditional money-back guarantee, so if you don't like it, ditch them. If you don't like your mobile plan, there's no reason to stick with something overpriced just because that's how it's always been. With premium plans starting at just $15 a month, Mint helps you break the traditional wireless cycle. So what are you waiting for? Go to mintmobile.com right now to see what offer is right for you. That's mintmobile.com right now and shop for your newest offer. And now, back to your regularly scheduled video. Batman became Robin's mentor after mobster Tony Zuko kills his entire family. The whole Grayson family shot in one night. Bruce is there to guide Dick Grayson down a path where his life isn't dominated by revenge and darkness and pain. Unlike Bruce felt after Joe Chill killed Thomas and Martha Wayne.
And then he meets this kid when he's late 21. And the kid's this super, this little working class circus kid who's totally cocky. And this introverted young Norman Bates Batman is suddenly, wait a minute, this is the kid that died in me. And the two become friends, and it's no creepy, it's no weird, it's like my best friend, he's my brother, he's everything I wish I could be. And the kid's looking at him going, he's everything I wish I could be.
You're gonna make me cry.
You see, Batman did not want Robin to be like him, but Wortham thought that the comics focused on a different type of grooming. Not one based on putting aside feelings of vengeance, but inserting feelings of attraction. Wortham argued that the gay implications of Batman and Robin were projected onto the boys reading it, turning them into homosexuals themselves. You know, it's funny, nothing really changes for the fear machine, does it? Accusations of homosexuality were renewed after the Joel Schumacher films, in part because Joel Schumacher was a gay filmmaker, and in part because the films were not well received at the time. Or at least Batman and Robin wasn't perceived well. Batman Forever, a little different. You see, Batman Forever almost made Robin a popular character again.
I need a name. Bat Boy, Nightwing.
He said it! Batman Forever told the Robin story fairly effectively, albeit in that film's campier aesthetic. Dick Grayson's parents are killed, and Batman has to guide Dick down a path that doesn't follow revenge. He isn't going down Batman's dark path thanks to Batman's mentorship.
I can't promise I won't kill Harvey.
A man's gotta go his own way.
Now keep in mind though, in this continuity, Batman got his revenge on the man who killed his parents, that being the Joker, not Joe Chill. And like with Batman and Joe Chill, Tony Zuko is replaced by a more colorful, iconic Batman villain, that being Two-Face, Harvey Dent. Ultimately, Batman kinda kills Two-Face after Robin is given an opportunity to get revenge but chooses not to, so I guess it doesn't totally defeat the logic of the film by having Batman throw a bunch of quarters at Two-Face while he's standing and he gets unsteady and all that shit. You know, this absolutely muddies the message. I'm not gonna lie, what we're talking about. It's a weakness of the film. But what are you gonna do? It's effective enough. Not perfect, and other stories did the story better, but, you know, Batman didn't exactly kill Two-Face. He just kind of lost balance trying to catch a bunch of quarters, that's all. However, Batman and Robin ruined whatever goodwill Batman Forever gave Robin, in part because it turned the titular characters into an arguing couple. The mentorship is over. Robin now feels like Batman's equal, his sidekick. Or at least, Robin thinks he's Batman's equal. Making this worse is that Batman and Robin are very similar in age. You know, in the comics, there's a good 18-20 year difference between Batman and Robin. But Chris O'Donnell is only 9 years younger than George Clooney. It isn't really a father and son relationship if it's a 9-year difference. Also, there's bat nipples. All of this adds up to a cocktail of implication that the 90s and 2000s fandom just couldn't help but mock for being extremely gay. Also, Batman and Robin, kind of a bad movie. Didn't help matters all that much. What a lot of these people ignored, though, in the process of hating on Robin, was that the comics had a very different type of character. Now, animation, I think, did a little bit to reestablish the first Robin as an icon. Teen Titans and later Young Justice illustrated that Dick Grayson can use the lessons Batman imparted on him to become not only a better hero, but also a better leader. Someone who can handle cosmic-level threats with strategy, cunning, and the right friends alongside him. Now, I do want to mention also the Arkham games because they were kind of a big force in shaping how people saw Batman outside the comics. And don't worry, the whole second half of this video is just me about the comics, but you gotta know the landscape of the fandom at the time. And unfortunately, most superhero fans don't read comics. I know, it's infuriating. Dick Grayson has a minimal presence in the games, considering how important he is to Batman. I would say that Clayface has a bigger role in these stories than Robin does. That seems kind of weird. Dick is basically absent in Arkham Asylum since the games take place after he left for Bloodhaven. In Arkham City, however, he guards the Batcave. In this capacity, he is framed as part of Batman's core team, rather than an independent hero, since his independence mainly means his absence. It's only Arkham Knight where he is extremely present in the story, but I feel it's too little too late, since the game already came out after the cartoons did much of the heavy lifting to give Nightwing his mainstream attention, his flowers. Audiences were on board with Nightwing as a hero at this point thanks to other media, and Arkham just kind of responded to that, I feel. As it stands though, even as Nightwing, Dick Grayson is still Robin to most people. He's still that sidekick.
Look at me. I'm 16 years old. 16. That's practically an adult, but you still treat me like I'm a little kid.
I mean, if the Gotham Knights games were better, maybe that would have shaped more perspectives. Maybe we would have seen Dick Grayson as Nightwing more in popular culture. Or if, say, Suicide Squad vs. Justice League was about Nightwing investigating why the JLA went nuts. But instead we got Harley Quinn shooting a Bruce Wayne clone, and Bruce leaving a message for Tim Drake, not Dick Grayson, that Harley ends up hearing instead. So it doesn't even get to its intended party. And Tim Drake, by the way, is a whole other character to deal with. Great character. Love Tim Drake. Very different talks about Tim Drake, though. We'll save that for another time. But then the films came out, specifically the Dark Knight Trilogy and the DCEU. The Dark Knight Trilogy helped re-establish Batman for modern audiences. Whatever influence the Teen Titans, Young Justice, or indeed the Arkhamverse had on Dick Grayson's mainstream popularity, the Dark Knight films helped establish Batman as a solo act. And Nolan seemed to hate the concept of Batman having a sidekick at all. He wasn't against a replacement, as seen by that composite character named Robin, who isn't really Dick, Todd, or Tim, but that character, again, that character is kind of more of an adaptation of Tim Drake now I think about it, instead of Dick Grayson. He comes to Bruce not because he has a dark period in his life that Bruce can help with, rather, like Tim Drake, this Robin reaches out to Batman to help him through his dark period in life. That sure as hell isn't a Dick Grayson thing. But honestly, Robin not even being there is preferable to what they did in the DCEU. Yeah, Zack Snyder, you're back on this show. Deal with it. In Batman v Superman, we learned that Joker killed a Robin, and his outfit is hung up in the Batcave. Now, the implication is that this Robin's death, this murder, is what pushed Batman down a darker path. So when the Battle of Metropolis Man still happened, that totally broke Batman even further. The fracture was the death of Robin, and the fact there's aliens completely shattered him. The big assumption was that this is Jason Todd's Robin, because after all, Jason Todd's also killed by Joker, his outfit's also hung up like in The Dark Knight Returns, and this movie clearly drew from Dark Knight Returns, even has Dark Knight Returns costume in there, of course. But no, it's not. Zack Snyder revealed that's Dick Grayson's outfit. So the Joker killed Dick Grayson. Much like Jimmy Olsen, Zack Snyder took an established character from DC Comics and just had them die off, almost off screen, to motivate other characters. That's great. Don't you get why people want Zack Snyder to direct these films? In all cases, Dick Grayson is seen as a prop in Batman's story, as opposed to a character who grows and develops before becoming independent of Batman, and still growing as a result. But even with all the good adaptations like Teen Titans or Young Justice, the problem is all these stories, they only adapt aspects of Dick's journey, but never the full picture. The phases are, of course, Dick as Robin, Dick breaking away from Batman, Dick becoming the leader of Teen Titans, Dick as Nightwing in Bloodhaven, Dick as Batman, and honestly, the entirety of the Tom Taylor run, which turns Dick into a man who brings systemic change to Bloodhaven and beyond. And then there's that period in the 2010s, New 52 and post-New 52. I don't really like talking about the Grayson bullshit, the secret agent shit, or that Rick Grayson bit where he gets amnesia after KJ Beast shoots him in the head. It's really dumb. I believe between the Court of Owls and Tom Taylor's run, DC tried doing a lot with Dick that didn't land. I'll get into that more in a bit. You see, decades after being Batman's sidekick, I mean really decades, Robin was there since the early issues in the 40s, Robin became older. He was off to college, and during the 70s, he had begun to butt heads with Bruce a little bit. He challenged Bruce back on his ideas, and this culminated in him joining a new team of heroes, the Teen Titans. Well, I mean, the new Teen Titans. The team first formed in the 60s, but that's beside the point. Anyway, the Teen Titans book sold very well. Around the same time of the Judas Contract, the famous story that was adapted in Teen Titans, the show, something very interesting happened. The legendary comic writer Marv Wolfman explained in an interview with 13th Dimension the following.
It was fairly simple, actually. I got a call that DC would really like Robin back in Batman, and they wanted Robin to be younger. Again, because Batman really needed a partner. The nice thing was that Teen Titans, which I was still on at the time, was way outselling Batman, and I really wanted Dick Grayson, and I really loved the character. We had aged him, we had made him a real leader, we had done a whole bunch of things with him, and I didn't want to give up Dick Grayson. And it suddenly struck me, I don't even know what happened because it was unprecedented in comics. I said, why don't I keep Dick Grayson and you create a new Robin and make that a big to-do in Batman, while we have Nightwing.
Ultimately, Robin will always be the other side to Batman, another half of someone else's story. and this is ironically similar to the path Jason Todd would eventually take, with the two both illustrating the path one can go after Batman takes you under his cape. Are you surrounded by peers with common life experiences who can help you grow, or are you left in violence, beaten and broken until all that remains is hatred and vengeance in your heart? Thankfully, both characters end up in good places, but that's the early trajectory of their characters. I think Red Hood, at least in the early issues of Red Hood, is the very thing Batman wanted Dick not to be. And as a foil, this came to head in the Battle for the Cowl storyline, a story that ends with Dick taking on the cowl and mantle of Batman. It's a temporary thing. It follows Batman's seeming death in Final Crisis. Don't worry, he wasn't dead, because of course he wasn't dead. He was just lost in time. But we don't have time to unpack Final Crisis right now. That's a whole lot. I think one thing is that unlike Tim Drake, who is anchored to the Robin identity, Nightwing never went back to being Robin. Once he was Nightwing, he was no longer Robin. There have been attempts over the years, especially with the 2010s, to take his character in different directions, like the Grayson stuff, where he's a secret agent, or Rick Grayson. But he has never gone backwards to being his pre-Teen Titans iteration, not even in reboots. I think this is partially because other characters took the mantle of Robin shortly after, like Tim Drake, but I digress. While Nightwing disagreed with Batman on many levels, he never hated Batman. He wouldn't go around and just say, "Fuck Batman," like an edgy edgelord. It was just that Dick was growing up and wanted an identity of his own. Even the identity of Nightwing came from someone other than Batman. The person who named Nightwing was Superman. You see, the Nightwing is a Kryptonian creature that strongly resembles a bat. It is a perfect union of Batman's darkness and the light of the greater DC universe, the optimism of Metropolis. Nightwing is the optimistic night before the dawn. And this is seen most especially with how Dick Grayson interacts with other DC heroes. See, that's the big thing. Batman and Nightwing are both leaders, but Batman always feels more self-contained. Even in the 90s and 2000s with Justice League, Batman always felt closed off from his peers, even Superman to an extent. You know, there's Tower of Babel where he reveals he has a plan to kill every Justice League member if it ever comes down to it. You know, I think that hurt his standing with other DC heroes for a bit of time. Now, the comics have gone to great lengths to fix this to an extent, with the whole Super Sons comic and all that, but Nightwing seemed to implicitly open himself up to his peers. He brought people together in the ways Bruce just chose not to. Like, obviously, Nightwing is often paired up with either Barbara Gordon or Starfire, depending on whether or not you think he's more a Bat Family guy or Teen Titans guy. Is Dick aligned with his father figure or his newfound friends? But Nightwing is also close friends with Wally West. Not romantically, obviously not. Like Nightwing, he was once a sidekick, but then over time took the mantle of the Flash after Barry Allen is seemingly killed in Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's funny how that keeps happening, isn't it? On the other hand, writers like Chuck Dixon and Grant Morrison took what Wolfman started with Nightwing as a new character and helped use Nightwing to elevate the Bat family in interesting ways. Dick Grayson becomes a pseudo-leader, an older brother figure who had matured and come back to balance Batman's darkness and helped his peers grow similarly through love and warmth. And this counterbalance is instrumental because it ties into Tim Drake's core belief that Batman just needs another Robin, as much as Batman needs to help Robin. With both Dick and Jason, Batman helped rescue kids at risk, but Tim Drake, he came to Batman. Tim pointed out how Dick Grayson and Jason Todd helped Batman through his darkness too. It wasn't just a one-way street. I don't think it's a coincidence that Cassandra Cain, Stephanie Brown, and even Damian Wayne were descendants of villains who Batman helped save from their surroundings, even as they all brought positive changes to Batman's life and the lives of the Bat family. A two-way street that Dick codified. Dick Grayson also helped out his peers in the Bat family, especially Damian. And you can't get any of that if you retcon anything that Dick Grayson did. If he's removed from the story, he can't be a mentor to Tim. He can't help out Damian. He can't pal around even with Jason Todd, helping to soften out his edges. Batman Black Mirror is a story that takes place during Dick's brief run as Batman, as well as during the Grant Morrison Batman run. And in each case, we basically see how far Dick has come from becoming Bruce. We see the warmth through the mask. We see the kindness he extends to the Bat family. But what about Nightwing's solo stories? Like, not Nightwing, leader of the Teen Titans, not Nightwing the first Robin, just Nightwing in Bloodhaven. What do those stories tell us about Dick Grayson, aside from the fact he's a bit more goofier than Batman is? This is the least explored topic in adaptations, and that's the biggest waste. Even adaptations that feature Dick Grayson prominently, like the Teen Titans show where he says fuck Batman, that quickly lost the hook of being a Dick Grayson story because it then tied into the greater DC universe. And again, centered on his relationship with Batman primarily. And the reason for that is that the comics have had a rough time with Nightwing. There are periods when Nightwing is written well as a solo hero, and periods the writers don't know what to do. They keep struggling with walking that tightrope between making him his own man and making him too aligned with other teams, the Bat Family or Teen Titans. And don't get me wrong, the stories are good, but who is Nightwing without his family with him, without his team? A Nightwing miniseries where he came into his own was written by Dennis O'Neil in 1995. And it was heavily anchored to Batman's mythos. Alfred gives Dick some old things, and in that he finds an old death threat issued to his parents that was dated right before they were murdered. So it's essentially a murder mystery story, kinda, even though we know who's gonna get murdered. Or maybe a conspiracy theory. I'll let you read it yourself to find out. But again, 95. Marv Wolfman and George Perez created the Nightwing persona in 1984. That means 11 years passed with Nightwing before he became a solo act. For comparison, Venom in The Amazing Spider-Man, he showed up in issue 298 as a cameo for fully appearing in the next issue. That was in 1988. Venom's first solo series, the Lethal Protector series, 93. Venom appeared later than Nightwing and got a solo issue beforehand. Venom. Chuck Dixon, for all of his flaws as a human being, which are many, did a lot to create a city where Nightwing can do some good and unpack his pain. Bloodhaven is different from Gotham in that it feels more grounded and grittier with its crime scene. I think the villain Blockbuster is one of the best Nightwing-specific villains around. He's like a Tombstone type crime boss, massive and imposing, but sophisticated and clever with his plotting. A real blunt force object that's a little more clever than you think. Bloodhaven and Blockbuster are the two things you see time and time again whenever a writer wants to anchor Nightwing to something wholly unique to him. Bloodhaven is Nightwing's main haunt. But also, Dixon wrote Nightwing as a more distinct whole person. He became this quippy, funnier, smart aleck, which, I think honestly really suits the character. Batman wanted to guide Dick away from vengeance, and we see what that leaves. Happiness, joy, optimism. It almost becomes like a Spider-Man type character, which I'm fond of because I love Spider-Man so much. And the fact that Dixon was writing this book during the heyday of Batman and Robin's hatedom, I think it kind of helped Dick become something more. It kind of kept things going for comic fans, where they know, hey, the movies didn't do him justice, but the comics sure did. The best issue I think Dixon wrote involving Nightwing isn't even in his Nightwing book. It's actually in Birds of Prey. I think it's the 8th issue, where Dick and Babs are just going around swinging on those circus ropes, and it gives Barbara this feeling of flight after being paralyzed from the waist down for so long. It's just a good character-driven storyline that's dialogue-focused and human-centered. I like that. I dig that. The first Nightwing series is not perfect, though, because after Dixon left, we got some controversial bits. The controversial run on the character by Devin Grayson. Ironic Grayson writing Grayson, but you get the idea. We see this new iteration of the villain Tarantula in this, and the villain murders Blockbuster and assaults Dick on top of a rooftop, which is heinous. What made it worse is that Grayson, the writer, not the character, seemed unwilling to admit the scene was assault until 2014, 10 years later.
I used a literal rape as a metaphorical nadir, and I know better. Or at least I should have known better, and I certainly do now. I was concentrating so hard on other elements of that scene, which felt so much more narratively significant to me, Blockbuster's murder primarily, that I totally lost sight of the power and non-symbolic consequence of the gesture I was using. By the time I realized the severity of that mistake and how harmful it might have been to actual survivors of sexual abuse and assault, myself included, I had run out of time to make it right. I'm not sure I could have made it right, mind you, but I did at least have the intention of bringing the story back around to it so that the act didn't exist completely devoid of consequence or analysis. But it does, and I regret that more deeply than I can say. So many factors went into that debacle, including an avalanche of increasingly arbitrary and bizarre crossover demands from upper editorial, and the company's failure to honor previously approved story outlines. but the responsibility for the ineffectiveness and potential harmfulness of that scene lies solely with me.
Grayson being assaulted would have disturbing echoes in media DC would create afterwards, especially in both the animated film Batman and Harley Quinn, as well as the Harley Quinn show, which I think deeply disrespects the character of Nightwing in a way that harkens back to his old reputation we were talking about at the beginning, where he's a joke character.
What's with your voice?
What are you talking about?
It's a bit overly serious.
I think it's an appropriate amount of serious.
But also, this run essentially derailed Dick's arc. His main villain's dead. He becomes a cop, which is a choice. It feels like we're moving away from him being this quippy street-level hero that Dixon drafted him as. But then Batman seemingly died in Final Crisis. In this Dick Grayson Batman saga, it's actually a really great storyline. His quippy nature really shines through the dour cowl, and I love his older brother dynamic with Damian. We saw Damian with Bruce for so long, we kind of lost touch on what Damian is like with other characters, and I think that really brought a lot out of Damian quite a bit. And we see Dick Grayson take on a new role, in a new position. We see him out of his element. Unfortunately, other writers would take taking Dick out of his element down a dark path in the New 52. Again, I think the problem is, prior to New 52, we got Dick really associated with Batman's general world, but then in the New 52, Nightwing was just a part of the Bat family and had no life beyond the Bat family for a good while. Like most of Nightwing's early run in the New 52, it's tie-ins to Bat family events. In this run, Nightwing primarily operates in Gotham or other cities, like Chicago. Fucking Chicago in the DC universe. That seems weird to say. I feel like every city in DC has to be made up. And one of the first non-Bat family tie-in stories, Second City, it focuses on Tony Zuko again. You know, the same ground the Nightwing miniseries covered, that the animated series back in the 90s covered. Every major Nightwing story cycles back on Tony Zuko, I feel like, at some point. It'd be like every Spider-Man story being about him hunting the burglar who shot Uncle Ben. Like, come on, retire Zuko. Well, actually, the Tom Taylor run also brings Zuko's legacy into the story, but that's actually really clever. And so it's not a hard and fast rule. Just be clever about how you bring Zuko back, all right? And then there's the Tim Seeley and Tom King run. We get the Grayson arc, where Dick abandons the Nightwing persona altogether to become a secret agent. And look, I get some people like this run. It's not badly written, but, you know, wasn't Nightwing a character interesting enough? Like we don't have to make him a secret agent, right? Oh, well, I mean, I guess we have to make him an author stand-in for the actual CIA agent Tom King to write about, because he has to make his own season now every story he writes. I mean, it wasn't in the past, sure, but it wasn't Nightwing. It was Tom King inhabiting Nightwing's skin and choosing not to wear the Nightwing outfit. I missed the disco outfit for Nightwing. That would be better to wear than his secret agent outfit. This lasted for a couple years, then we were back to Bloodhaven. And despite attempts to re-establish Nightwing as Bloodhaven's defender, we even brought Blockbuster back. Yet no, this led to the Rick Grayson arc, where Dick gets shot in the head and loses his memory and basically becomes a grungy edgelord. He's a smelly little guy. And there's tie-ins to the Court of Owls, because of course it is. Again, so we're retreading the New 52 storyline, as well as creating not Dick Grayson. There's no humor, there's no warmth. It was ironically thanks to Tom King, who was working on Batman at the time, that we got Nightwing back to being Nightwing. And this led into the fantastic Tom Taylor run, which I feel was the first time Nightwing felt like Nightwing since the Dixon era. At least in his own book. If you ask someone to recommend a Nightwing title, they'll usually point you to Chuck Dixon's run, or Tom Taylor's run. They might point to Dixon's Nightwing Year 1 story, or Nightwing The Lost Years by Marv Wolfman, and they're good stories that explore Dick starting on his own and being a hero and finding his identity. Others point out the fallout to Court of Owls and that whole storyline, where Dick has to come to terms with being formally groomed as a Talon, one of the agents of this Illuminati-esque organization, the Court of Owls. But these stories feel very anchored to Dick as Batman's protege, I think. Even the Tom Taylor run on Nightwing is Nightwing inheriting a massive fortune from Alfred, which leads Dick to wanting to create a lasting, systemic change in Bloodhaven and beyond. And they're all great storylines. But I feel like there's one comic that I think really highlights Dick's growth, and it's a super underrated event storyline. JLA/Teen Titans, The Technus Imperative. Not Justice League vs. Teen Titans, that animated movie that I don't love. No, JLA/Teen Titans from 1998. and this is during the height of the Dixon run and the height of anti-Dick Grayson sentiment in mainstream popularity thanks to Batman and Robin. It came at the right time, I guess. At this point in the comics, Cyborg went off to space and came back altered. He was essentially overtaken by his cybernetic augmentations and now is going around the universe assimilating everything. He captures the JLA Watchtower and the Justice League goes in to stop Cyborg. But he also kidnaps the Teen Titans into his persona, but doesn't devour them. Now, mind you, at this point, Wally West was also part of the Justice League, and he and the rest of the Titans conclude that their old friend is keeping them alive because there's some human part of Cyborg still there that is holding on to the bond they shared as teammates. He's still human deep down on all these augmentations controlling him. The Justice League wants to stop Cyborg, but the Titans, as well as Wally, who switches sides, steps in to keep the League from attacking their friend. And what commences is Dick Grayson and the rest of his friends, his comrades, standing up against Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, everyone, to save one of their own. And they ultimately do. This is one reason it never sat right with me how in the New 52 and the DCEU, Cyborg is a starting member of the Justice League. It doesn't feel right to me. Cyborg has a core bond with Dick Grayson and the rest of his Teen Titan members. It's his team, not Superman and Batman. So what could a new DC film run do with Nightwing? What lessons can they learn from the comics? Well, first and foremost, making him a member of two teams, the Bat Family and the Teen Titans. His alliance with both is essential and helps shape how he interacts with the rest of the greater world. But more importantly, he is a light. He is a warmth. While he is definitely helped by Batman, and that storyline is adapted often when he's brought into the screen, he also has to shape Batman. It's important to remember Batman has to grow as a result of being with Dick Grayson. He has to be shown warmth, and we have to see how Batman can genuinely help mentor and shape someone's life, not just as a crime fighter, but as a human being, as a person. But you also have to remember his connection to the other members of the DC universe, his ties to the Teen Titans, to Superman, even to John Kent, who he mentors in the recent Tom Taylor run to some extent. You need to have that to illustrate how Dick Grayson is ultimately optimism. He's ultimately a sign that anyone, even in the darkest paths, can find the light. Dick Grayson is truly, in many regards, the heart of the Bat Family. Any story that fails to adapt the Bat Family in all of its extent misses something crucial. It misses that Batman needs his family just as much as Batman wants to help those struggling find their light.
If you're watching this, I'm Batman. Really, Dick?